Internet, let's talk about The Raid / The Raid Redemption, depending on which title you call it. This Patron review is for John Goetz, who is getting me to see a whole world of new content, and frankly, I am digging it. Now, The Raid is a movie that has been hyped for me for many, many years. This is a movie that has influenced pop culture since it came out. This is a movie that did gangbusters, that arguably changed the way martial arts movies are seen in America. I've heard so much about this movie, and I was really excited to get to dive into it for a Patron review, and it did not disappoint. Now, the thing about The Raid is it is much more graphically violent than I'm used to in martial arts films, so take all of my slight negatives with a grain of salt. I have learned in the last 3 years that I am not as good at gore as I was when I was younger. I don't tend to gravitate towards horror movies anymore. I don't tend to gravitate towards hyperviolence in the way that I used to. I haven't revisited, you know, some of my favorite slashers from when I was a kid, but I'm sure they would not stick quite the same, and I've never been big on torture porn like your Saw or your Hostel. Now, I'm not saying that this movie is by any means, but it was at times a lot more graphically violent than I would typically seek. So it definitely was not your Jackie Chan, your Jet Li. It was much more your Tony Jaa. It was much more that vein and then some. So for me personally, it was a little too violent in the blood and gore aspects. I loved the martial arts. I loved the cinematography. I loved the stunts. I loved the spectacle. I loved the action of it. But I definitely at times struggled with the gore. It made me lean away. It made me recoil, which I usually lean into martial arts scenes. I usually want to see how they shape a shot, how they frame an action, how they, you know, move within the frame, and then on top of that, beyond the directing, I love to see how a martial artist can use their body in ways I'd never expect. I'd love to see how a stunt person can do something that looks impossible, and this movie absolutely delivered on the gravity-defying aspects, on the that's not physically how things move, on the that's not how physics work. All of those things were there. It was just a little gorier than my cup of tea. So I graded this personally for Coy a B- for me, my experience, but I gave the movie an A-, if that makes sense. I had a B- experience because I wanted it to be a movie with less graphic gore, but I cannot take away the technical proficiency and enjoyment. So over on Letterboxd, which is where I've been rating my movies, it got a B-. But as far as if I was going to tell someone that was a huge martial arts fan or someone that wasn't so squeamish when it came to gore, I would say this is an A-. I hope that makes sense. So my own personal rating was very different than what I would advise someone who was more comfortable with that sort of thing to do. Like, for example, I saw Halloween, the newest iteration of Halloween, that came out a few years ago, and it was actively a struggle for me to get through because I kept being like, those kids shouldn't be out, and I was like, old man yells at cloud, and I just couldn't get into it, so I decided not to watch horror movies anymore. So with this movie, I definitely could see all of the skill, all of the precision, all of the artistry in it. I just wish it was a little less gory just for my sake. So the movie itself, I really appreciated the fact that we got an 80s-esque montage from the jump. I really appreciated the fact that we instantly had something to endear us to the lead character. I liked how impossibly charming this character was. I watched this subtitled, so it was actually trickier to take notes. I usually watch the movie and take notes while I'm going. I was able to do this, but I actually paused a fair amount, rewound some of the stunts, which in itself is a testament to how incredible the stunts and action set pieces were, that I rewound to rediscover some of those things. But I loved that I didn't know the language and I was still immediately endeared to a character within 5 minutes. We don't have a lot of time from meeting the character to us landing on the apartment complex. You have to immediately like this guy, and I was really impressed with you know, the charm of the charisma of the actor. I didn't need to know what he was saying. I felt it. I didn't need to have said those words before. You know, I didn't need to relate from a verbal standpoint. I related from the man, from the energy, from the performance itself, because it's always, for me, it takes me a few minutes to adjust to reading. Subtitles, I have to acclimate. And in this case, I acclimated to both reading the subtitles and to the emotionality of the lead character very quickly, which is very impressive for me. So, once again, immediately endeared to the lead. I loved the escalating pace of, obviously, you're in one building for the lion's share of this movie, and they literally use the stairs and the numbering system to build up stakes. I loved the use of the Z-axis. I loved the fact that the movie did your more traditional pan and scan fights. It also had a lot of vertical fights with tosses and everything else, but it also, especially one scene that went through the floor using an axe, they went into another floor, it used the Z-axis to go depth. And in this case, it was depth vertically, which is just dope. Like, you experience this part of the frame as well as this part of the frame and this part of the frame, and I love that. So, good use of Z, Y, and X-axis for all of the action, for the framing, for the directing. I can't imagine directing much of this film, most of this film, all of this film, trying to imagine in your mind's eye how all of the action moving at that sort of pace would ever possibly be captured in a frame. It was beautifully done. I can see why Gareth Evans has become such a name in this genre and amongst cinema. I see why this movie did exceptionally well and why it's become so iconic. I understand why I've seen this poster everywhere. I understand why all of these actors have popped up internationally ever since. This is such a breakout film. This is such a movie that made stars of so many people. I'm going to talk about the cast later on in this, but I was really impressed, and it makes sense. I've seen all these guys pop up and the director pop up elsewhere. So overall, super impressed. Like I said, A- if you're not as squeamish as me, and I'm so glad to have seen this film. I want to dive in the notes I took, now that we're a few minutes in, my general thoughts. I took notes throughout the film, and again, there's a little less notes than normal because I had to pause and rewind and stuff. But this was a $1.1 million budget that did $4.1 million US alone. That means it did 4 times its budget, so about 2 times its budget plus advertising, if it's got the average 1-to-1 ratio, which is absolutely incredible. It made its money back domestically times 2, not to mention it's $5.2 million international, and that brings us to a $9.3 million worldwide on a $1.1 million budget. That is anywhere between 7 and 8, depending on advertising, profit. That's insane. To make 7 times profit, that is staggering. No wonder it got a sequel and almost a third movie. We'll talk about the third movie later on. This is sitting pretty at 7.6 IMDb. I personally give it a little higher than the IMDb rating. It got an 86% Rotten Tomatoes. That's a little closer to where I put it, my personal rating. And then it's got a 92% Google users, which is about where I'd place it to recommend to others. So I agree with a lot of these numbers. 7.6, 86%, that's where I am, and 92 for Google users. And then on the world of trivia, there was a bunch of really cool, fascinating stuff. I'm going to go through that before I dive into my notes. I was fascinated by, if you guys have seen my reviews before, my notes are generally fairly long-winded, so hopefully bear with me. If you're still here this deep into the review, you probably are curious what notes I took. The martial art used in this film is Pencak Silat, the indigenous fighting style of Indonesia. I had never seen some of these movies before. I had never seen most of these movies before. I am no martial arts expert, but I am a gigantic appreciator of martial arts. I'm fascinated by the art of movement, and it's an art. It's so beautiful, and it's so not always violent, but often violent and definitely used in cinema, but just seeing it in person, seeing the way people move, even when they're not fighting, that have mastered an art like martial arts. I just love the way humans can train themselves to master something like this, and this martial art was just stunningly beautiful. The use of knees, elbows, the use of feet particularly. I loved that feet were used as hooks, as blunt objects, to move around. A few of my notes talk about feet. The feet in this film, the footwork itself was just stunning. Every actor that played a member of the SWAT team was actually trained by the Indonesian Naval Special Ops to use the hand grenades and weapons and all that properly. I love that. You could tell they had weapons training. It did not feel forced. It did not feel like actors that were like holding prop guns, but the guns themselves were aircraft prop guns. All of the cycling muzzle flashes, casings, etc. was all CGI, which is also impressive at the budget. They used all fake guns, but were trained to use them properly, which worked out. That translation was totally perfect. The actor who played Mad Dog, Yayan Rahayin, had once trained Pencak Silat for the Indonesian Presidential Security Forces. So he was basically the equivalent to the Secret Service. In 1989 and in the early 90s, he was that. So the guy was basically a Secret Service op for the Indonesian Presidential Security Force. That is so cool, and no wonder that guy can move, and no wonder he's also in the sequel. Gareth Evans originally wanted an action drama set in prison, but the budget was too small, so when this did exceedingly well, that's why the budget and the expanse of the second movie happened, because that was the original goal, which I think is really cool. The original title means Death Raid, shortened to The Raid, and in some case, The Raid Redemption, depending on which version you saw tracking. Despite the fact the movie's tagline mentions 30 floors of chaos, the apartment only actually uses 14 floors, 15 if you count the ground floor. I thought that was funny. It's literally half. So it is 15 floors, but the tagline is 30 floors, but I didn't keep track. I just thought that was funny. There is a Wilhelm scream, which I always love. Let's see. Lighting was very difficult because the camera moves so much. So the production actually used light poles on the cameras. So the reason the lighting works in so many ways, and like I said, the use of all these axes and the speed at which is they actually mounted lights to track with, and I think that totally landed. Like, see, this would not work. These shadows would not play because of this computer screen. And let's see. The main protagonist uses one style, and most of the others are using various combinations of judo, taekwondo, karate, and other forms. So it is not just the Pinkax-a-lot, but that is, I can't pronounce that. I apologize to any martial arts person that's hearing this and going, ooh, every time I try to say that word. But it is a combination, especially in the case of the multiple martial arts used throughout the film. And especially the scene with the chemistry lab, the scene with all the chemicals and stuff. There was a lot of beautiful, different martial arts utilized in that sequence. All right, let's get into my notes. My notes on this film are: I loved the opening being a training montage with a literal ticking clock. And there's the stakes moments in: a man and his family, unborn child to come. Yes, cheesy, but totally applicable 80s action movie dialogue. Even reading the dialogue, I could feel that 80s, like, it was so influenced by a lot of 80s dialogue. I love the appropriate level of cheesy dialogue in an action movie, and this landed it, and I really appreciated it. Jesus, that execution sequence was brutal. Fuck this bad guy. So in the opening, I was already like gored out. So this was a moment I was like, oh no, I'm a little bitch. I'm gonna struggle with this one, and I did. That just from the execution sequence on, I was squirmish. Okay, let's see. Yeah, we want this guy dead in one scene. They immediately made the bad guy so bad that in 3 minutes you're like, fuck this guy, kill him, and I loved that. We immediately loved our good guy, immediately hated our bad guy in 10 minutes. I can see why the leads went on to huge success. I recognize so many of these actors from the beginning. I love revisiting movies, especially like 90s dramedies or rom-coms, and seeing actors that are now hugely successful working actors, and this movie has so many people that went on to huge success. 10 minutes in and we're on location. So 10 minutes in and we're already at the place I know we're spending the entire film. This feels like what a video game movie should feel like. I loved all of the multiple actors, like especially the SWAT, the way they moved. I loved what the cameras moved. It felt like a video game. It felt like we were escalating in action and we were about to like take over. Loved that. Awesome use of stairs and editing. The numbering, I loved when they were like lapping around the numbers, and it just, we felt the tension build. Again, we're in the first act. Whoa, that bullet shot was crazy. Awesome use of full-on horror movie gore, which would go on to haunt me. Full-on horror movie. Impressed technically, even if it's not my cup of tea. So immediately I'm like, bleh. So that definitely got me. Great use of music to build tension. I loved the score and the music itself that's building tension throughout the film. One act in and so many cool slow-mo shots. The slow-mo in this film was used excessively. That wasn't a bad thing. Every time there was a slow-mo shot, I was like, that's exactly what I wanted. And there was a lot more slow-mo than most films, and I loved all the slow-mo in this one. I would have preferred a dash of backstory for the older cop, I said in the first act. We meet the older cop, and we're supposed to know, or supposed to feel something for him. We don't. I get to that more later. I really enjoy the use of zooms while pushing. This movie does a lot of tracking with digital zooms while also pushing the camera, which gives you a slightly disorienting but also very fast-paced action. I really love a good zoom push, especially with martial arts, and this movie does that very well. The through the floor into action might be my favorite shot so far. Love the use of Z-axis. That's how I opened this review. That clearly left a mark on me. Cool use of wide shots and silence ringing to show scope and break up the action. There's like a 3-minute sequence that's silent with a ringing sound, and a lot of war movies use this when there's an explosion or something to break up the action. It allows you to catch your breath while still keeping the tension high, and I really thought they did that well in the middle of a series of fights, especially a movie with this many fight sequences. How do you let the audience catch its breath but not break the tension? You use this beautiful, beautiful trope, which I thought they handled very well. Loved the ringing in the ear scene, and it dulls out all of the sounds, so the violence in front of you is more visually jarring, but you're able to catch your breath. It's a fascinating, when used well, technique. Okay. Fridge bomb, I wrote in all caps. Oh shit, that hand-to-hand just made this all the violence worth it. The hand-to-hand after fridge bomb was so stunning. The speed, the accuracy, the technique, all of it. That face slice through the wall shot is brutal. When he's stabbing through to Tiffany's in the wall and the machete comes through and he basically like cleans it off as he pulls it back out. That whole sequence, I was like, oh, boy. And it was great. That one got me. Our guy's footwork is sensational, both offensively and defensively, as kicks or moving forward, side, or diagonal. He uses his feet to navigate while using them offensively, and both as hooks and blunt objects. I was just so impressed with the footwork in this film. I wrote Ong Bak elbows. Tony Jaa, one of the craziest martial artists working. Ong Bak, I remembered all the elbows being very jarring for my brain. I don't watch a lot of martial arts films, I'm going to be fully honest there, but I remember Ong Bak having some really impressive elbows. Loved the second lead's fight scene, which I don't... Loved the second lead's fight scene with I Don't Like Guns Guy. Oh yeah, so I didn't know the big bad was going to be called Mad Dog, but I called him I Don't Like Guns Guy for a while. The knee and location heavy use of his martial art was so cool. He used knees really well, but he also used his environment really well, and there was a lot of wall use that I was really impressed by. Filming this must have been a nigh impossible nightmare. I can't imagine timing plus choreography, again, from the beginning. Ooh, twist! Our guy knows someone on the inside. Wait, his brother's on the inside? I like that twist. That worked for me. Admittedly, second lead dying was surprising. I didn't expect to lose our second guy, but it built up more tension, allowed for the movie to escalate. The fight tracking and big fights with chemical room escalates directing skill even farther. Okay, sorry. So the chemical room fight, the escalating of directing skill is next level. The chemical room fight is probably my favorite next to the through the floor sequence. The speed and precision to even somewhat be safe is incredible. I don't know how they did most of that stuff, especially with the objects. Obviously props can be fake, but I was so impressed with the chemical room and everything they used as props, as violence. The navigating through that room was so cool, and I liked the change of scenery. The chemical room scene was just... we had to kill the second lead to earn the 2-on-1 madness. So that's when I realized, oh, Mad Dog has to earn his reputation. So now we're impressed and fearful of Mad Dog to the point where we see brothers fighting Mad Dog. I love the 2-on-1 fight scene. Even though there was something that was funny, there was literally a point where the brother just becomes like a speed bump that the other guy gets knocked over like 5 times. But I see why they had to do that, and it totally worked for me by the end of it. That whole 2-on-1 fight scene was so very good. Oh, that's why we didn't have backstory for the cop, I wrote down. So at that point, I have enjoyed the older cop reveal because that's why we didn't really learn a lot about him. Long hair, big bad, Mad Dog. Use of defensive offense, throwing his weight to dodge and leveraging it into an attack is super cool. I love his defensive offense. The way he literally counters his weight and causes that to be an offensive attack while also dodging attacks. So cool. The laws of physics barely apply to this guy. Elbows, feet, knees, arms, fist, general weight, all of it, impressive. Poor big bro just becomes a speed bump to throw a bad guy over by the end here. So much broken everything. All right, I'm in for less character development for third act development, which is the older cop, and the brothers moment sticks their landing. The very end with the brothers walking out and him repeating the line about it just fits. It worked for me. The one brother fit in this world of scum and villainy, and the other brother fit as a cop. I love a tale of brothers. I love the dichotomy of brothers. I loved how incredible fighters they were. I love that they still respected each other on opposite sides of the tracks. I love that he was so honored to be an uncle. Like, so much of that really worked for me. So, again, I really enjoyed my experience with this film. I thought it was fucking crazy. Going on to the cast, we've got Iko Uwais. I don't know how to say his last name. I don't say his first name. Iko, I-K-O, space U-W-A-I-S is our lead. He is so good. Again, instantly captivating, instantly charming, incredible martial artist. He only has 13 credits to his name, and they already include Star Wars Episode 7, Mile 22, an exceptional Marky Mark action sequence he has in there. I remember watching Mile 22 and being like, who's this guy? Now I know. And then Stuber, which is a action comedy with, oh man, Kumail Nanjiani and Drax, Dave Bautista, there's his name, Dave Bautista and Kumail. Wu Assassins, which is a show I've heard is very good, and he's in the upcoming Snake Eyes, which I'm very excited about because I'm excited for Snake Eyes. Joe Taslim, which is the brother Jaka, has also exactly 13 credits to his name on IMDb anyway. He is in the upcoming Mortal Kombat, which is very akin to Snake Eyes. Very impressive, with only 13 credits being Mortal Kombat. He's also in Star Trek Beyond and Fast 6, Two incredible resumes. This movie started some giant careers. And then we've also got Yayan Ruhane, who is Mad Dog, who has 24 credits to his name, who was once in the Secret Service equivalent in Indonesia, who was in John Wick 3. I remember him there, and I remember being scared the crap out of that guy, and now I see where his career started. Also in Star Wars 7. Also, like, all of these guys are in various Skyline movies, like Skyline 2 and 3 featured a bunch of these guys. The director has 10 credits as a writer and a director, which include VHS 2 and the obvious Raid 2, but he's also working on Gangs of London as the co-creator, writer, and director. Gangs of London, I am so excited to see. I thought it was a movie when I saw the trailer, and now I realize it's a show. We don't have it in the States yet. I'm very excited to get in the States. I'm very excited for Gangs of London. It was on my most anticipated, ironically, it was on my most anticipated movies of 2020 till I realized it was a show, and we don't have it yet. So Gangs of London, I'm very excited for. Now, after seeing Gareth Edwards do his thing in The Raid, I'm even more excited. Moving on to what the sequel is. I haven't seen The Raid 2, obviously, but it has a $6.5 million worldwide box office receipt, so it did pretty well, and it expanded into Jakarta, so he got to make the movie he originally wanted to make out of The Raid 1, and Raid 3 would have gone to the jungle. Evan said Iko Uwais' character Rama would have only appeared in the opening scene of The Raid 3, which would have instead focused on a Japanese gang that appeared in The Raid 2. A double cross would have sent the gang boss and hiding in the jungles of West Java. So it would have been a Japanese kill squad that's used to the streets of Tokyo, suddenly having to deal with the terrain of a jungle hunt, a bit like Predator in a way. That sounds awesome. A Japanese squad that's used to, you know, suburban life, going out in the jungle, very Predator. Love that idea. Evan said he's sure the film would have pissed off an awful lot of people and would have gone back to the tight running time of the first movie rather than the epic scope of the second one. I love the fact they were probably going to kill off Rama, because that would have surprised the hell out of so many people and consolidated down to small. Again, I haven't seen The Raid 2, but it sounds cool to go expand, contract like that to surprise people. I loved in one of the Friday the 13th when they open the film by killing off all the characters and you're like, what? And then there's opening credits and you're like, oh god, shit like that makes me happy with sequels. So, really dug this journey. Thank you very much for getting me on this Raid train, John Goetz. Do check out my Letterboxd, everybody, for ratings and reviews. I don't really read up the reviews, but I have star ratings and all that over there, so if you want to know what I think of a film, it is an option. If you want to become a patron, there is a tier wherein I review anything you want me to see, 3 or 4 episodes of a show, a movie, and then I do a review like this where I do, you know, a good amount of research into the cast, the crew, my experience, my review. I take notes, and John Goetz has been incredible, and this is another review for him. As always, I want to thank Heather Long for everything she does. She's fantastic as well. She's also in that tier, and she's of the co-sponsor producer tier, so she helps me make everything possible. And you can also check out a review I did last week for AJ Lancaster of a crazy mind trip of a movie, the opposite of The Raid. So there's a bunch of reviews. If you're on my YouTube, they're over there, or over here, or wherever on YouTube it might be. So thank you, John Goetz, for getting me to watch The Raid after many, many years of hearing the hype, and My Hero Academia, which I fucking, dude, that show. So once again, thanks, John. I will talk to you guys very, very soon. Keep watching movies, keep making cool shit, and thanks. I'll see you guys soon.